All right, we're going to start our meeting. Unfortunately,
We're halfway through the public comment.
I didn't see one of our speakers earlier, and I apologize about it on our audience items. So I'm going to give this gentleman the opportunity to speak. If you just give us 1 second here, sir. All right, Mr. Ernest Goodrich, Sr. Sir, please step up to the microphone and make sure that it's on.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
You're good. Sir, you'll have 3 minutes to address the board, and we'll give you a 30-second warning before your time's up.
Okay.
Start whenever you're ready.
Okay. 2 quick ones before I read my written statement. It's kind of strange that the young lady was speaking how you all worked with her to get the building built. And right after her, a young man came up here to chastise you all for being callous and unconcerned about your own students during that horrific rain. And that's just the opposite ends or 2 sides of one coin. And I'm sitting there thinking that if you all are that unconcerned about your living students in your district, my speaking about the Sugarland 95 will fall on deaf ears. However, I came all the way from Cypress, Texas, so I'm still going to read my written prepared statement. And I come before you as a concerned citizen regarding the violent disrespect and desecration of the Sugarland 95. I urge you to stop all actions and make no further decisions on your own and to follow the directives of the judge and the communities and the interested parties before you make any other decisions about these 95 people who lived and died right where we are. Several things I learned through this process, heard about, is that there was an agreement made and you all just kicked it to the side and decided to go your own way. And it's almost like I will obey the law and the rules if they're in my favor, but if they're not, I can disregard them and do what I want to do. And we in the community want to know, why haven't you had a full and complete DNA analysis? Now, at certain times I heard there was no money, but if we can build this building, if we can build the new school that's being built, then there's money if you really want to invest it in finding out who these people are. They had names, they had families. And if you didn't do the DNA, have you tried any other way that we haven't heard about to identify them or their living relatives? Matter of fact, what is your plan to recognize and to honor them as victims of an unjust criminal leasing system that intentionally targeted African Americans mostly, but all people of color? And the funeral home. What if any African American funeral homes, if you do move on, were given an opportunity to participate in the interment of these bodies? So as board of trustees of these students, I see what you really role model them for is to, again, obey a judge's decision if it benefits them, but disobey it if not. To show respect for the deceased as long as it doesn't interfere with your plans, or you can just leave them desecrated and forgotten about.
Thank you, sir.
So please work with the community, step back, take a pause. It doesn't hurt anybody or anything.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you being here. Next is our first information item, the 2008, please hold your applause, the 2018-19 State and Federal Accountability System Performance Update. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. We have been eagerly waiting to share with you the results of our 2018-19 accountability report. We're going to begin, which we're very excited about, the community-based accountability system that we're working on, and follow up with additional information on the state accountability. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth Martinez to kick us off.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree, Mr. Burdine, board members. We are excited to be with you again this year to provide information about the accountability report. Typically, when we come forward with this, we're sharing strictly that, the accountability. This year, we're integrating information about the community-based accountability system, which holds us accountable to the community for fulfilling the hopes and dreams that the community has for their students. So I'm pleased this evening to turn it over to Dr. Audra Udy, I said it right. I've been practicing. Dr. Udy, who's going to provide information about CBAS, community-based accountability, and the state A through F accountability ratings. We also have with us this evening Stephanie Williams and Carmela Levy-David, and they're going to provide information on leadership and instructional supports to help our students. Dr. Udy?
Ma'am, there you go. Please adjust the microphone too, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Dupree and Board of Trustees. I am honored to be with you this evening to speak about the state accountability, the federal accountability, community-based accountability, and our instructional system and leadership systems to support improvement on student outcomes. And we will begin with community-based accountability this evening because that is where FBISD is concentrating its efforts to ensure that we are working toward the development of the whole child. In other words, we are building a system to ensure that state and federal accountability and formative assessments are just one piece of the bigger picture of what we're doing to develop the whole child. The profile of a graduate is representative of what we are doing for children by developing 7 key attributes by the time they graduate FBISD. What we also want to do is ensure that we are respecting and honoring the talents, interests, and gifts of our students as we develop them to be successful citizens. The board has done extensive work over the last several years to build the strategic framework necessary for community-based accountability to be developed in this way. And so part of the key work and the core elements of the community-based accountability system are our core beliefs and commitments, our district's mission, vision, and profile of a graduate. And so we want to thank the board for the considerable efforts that have been put into building this particular strategic framework, helping us go forward with community-based accountability. In addition to that, the board has spent time thinking clearly about what goals we want to set as a district in order to further student outcomes in FBISD. And with that has developed 4 goals centered around collaboration, ensuring equity, ensuring risk-taking for students, and ensuring students own their learning and their behavior. And so these key elements help set up community-based accountability to be successful in FBISD. One of the other major components of community-based accountability is the accountability engine. And you might think of the accountability engine as a mental model of how we can continuously improve over time for our students. And so one of the key components of the accountability engine is that we as a district develop key questions to drive the organization in the direction we want it to go, to improve student outcomes. And so the key questions are similar to missions of the district in terms of what it is we want students to be able to achieve in order to be successful in life. With that, we also work through the engine to decide if we're moving in the direction we want to go, what are some of the responses we want to see the organization have in order to show that we're moving in that direction? And then what evidence will we accept that proves up that we've accomplished those things with students? Not just to say, you know, look better, but to ensure that we're truly doing the sorts of things that we set out to do for students. And that takes some vetting with our community members. Our students are involved in that, parents are involved in that. We'll show you shortly some of the meetings we're having to gather that kind of input. And then as we work to continuously improve, we review information from time to time to see how we're progressing and make change or make decisions where necessary to continue moving the organization in the direction we want it to go for the benefit of our students and our community. Not for the benefit necessarily of politics or the state or federal levels, but to directly benefit the students who live here and learn here every single day and who will be citizens in our communities. With that, I would also like to tell you that we had a design team meet in the fall of 2018-19. Mrs. Grail James was a board member who participated in that design team and helping us get started in building our community-based accountability. And we continued to do the work this year and will over the next several years until we expand district-wide to all campuses and all departments. So we appreciate the considerable time Ms. James gave in working with the design team to develop our own key questions around what we want for students. One of the key things that we want to note as a difference between state accountability and community-based accountability is that state accountability is based on one test on a single day. So it's just taking one moment in time and assessing many different factors about where state accountability believes a student will go or what a student knows. However, we all know there's much more to that. To develop caring, compassionate citizens who are able to communicate, who are able to problem solve and think, all of those attributes that we see in the profile of a graduate. One thing that we have been doing with about 50 other districts throughout the state of Texas is working through what we call the Texas Public Accountability Consortium. So about 50 other districts in the state have worked together to come up with 7 themes that we believe represent the types of work that school districts throughout the state of Texas do to help students have the right kinds of outcomes. And so these themes are listed here as a part of the community-based accountability system. What this will eventually allow us to do is to have a better accountability system across the state of Texas, and we hope to influence that by working together around these 7 themes. We've vetted these themes in various ways to try to make sure we have all of the major themes represented of the work, and then we are continuing to build out our own set of key questions to support those pillars. So 7 pillars are student learning and progress, student readiness for the next level, engagement and well-rounded students that pursue their interests and their passions, community engagement and partnerships, so inspiring the community to be involved in the work with us, professional learning and quality staff. In order to be successful, thank you. In order to be successful, we need to ensure that we have all of our staff well qualified to deliver the types of learning and the learning environment that we want for our students. And then systems and operations includes all of the various departments around the district that help support the work for student outcomes. And finally, safety and well-being of students. So these are our 7 major themes, and what I would like to do is take you into an example of some of the key questions. The key questions you will see all start with to what degree, because when we seek to answer these questions, campuses and departments will answer them in different ways according to the work that they're doing and according to where they are in the organizational work. But the key questions will help drive us all in the right direction for the kinds of student outcomes we want. So I'm going to show you some examples of what that looks like. You'll see that there are key questions for every single attribute in the profile of a graduate, in addition to other types of key questions that help drive our work. So, for example, under the pillar of student learning and progress, we have 7 key questions that have been developed by the FBISD design team. I'll take, for example, 1.6. In 1.6, we are asking, to what degree do our teachers and our faculty support, emulate, encourage, and model and move students toward the goal of effective communicator that we find in the profile of a graduate? So what we have done is taken each of the pillars and developed out these key questions. The one pillar that remains to finish developing out questions for is the area of systems and operations, and I'll speak to you about that in a few minutes and tell you what we're doing there this year. We are only in the beginning stages of this work, and the district is working closely with John Tanner of TestSense to help lead us through this work, but we are also working very collaboratively with other districts throughout the state. We occasionally meet together in person and occasionally do Skype work sessions and those sorts of things to help share with each other the progress that we're making. And we find it very encouraging and exciting work, and believe that we're going to be able to help innovate the accountability system in Texas. Over the next several years, we will develop out this system, and so I'm going to give you an example of the types of work that we're doing this year and where that is leading. Last spring, we had 6 campuses who self-selected themselves to be a part of the initial community-based accountability work, And they took the key questions from the design team and decided which key questions they needed to focus on to do pilot work this year. So we trained up principals and several stakeholders from the campuses, 7 or 8 other people, around community-based accountability. Those campuses that are the pioneers in this effort are Hightower High School, Dulles Middle School, Thornton Middle School, Quail Valley Middle School, Colony Meadows, and Mission Bend Elementaries. So this year, 1920, they are piloting their work around the key questions, and that will help us inform how we do reporting by next August on community-based accountability. In addition to that, our plan is to select and train up another 10 campuses in community-based accountability this year so that they may implement in 2021 the work that they have selected. And then we also have added on a community-based accountability operational design team. So we have departments like human resources, finance, our legal department, transportation, fine arts, athletics, etc., all coming together, learning about community-based accountability, and developing out additional key questions that help support the operational work of the district. So very excited about the movement in that direction as well. Now what I would like to do is explain to you how we're taking input from the community in order to help inform the process, because again, this is a system of being accountable to our students, our parents, our community. So last spring, we held our first 3 Fort Bend Forward forums at Elkins, Hightower, and Kempner. And what we did was to invite about 10 representatives from each campus in a given feeder pattern. So the elementaries and middle schools that feed into Hightower came together with us at Hightower, along with representation from Hightower. And we took them through a protocol around what their hopes and dreams are for their children. It was an exciting time. We had quite a bit of student representation, and there were several themes that came out that we presented in a report to the feeder pattern to say, these are the priorities by stakeholder group and as a whole for your feeder pattern. In addition to that, what we're also doing is summing it up across the district to see what themes come out as a whole in the district. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that came up through the 3 different feeder patterns was discussion about social emotional learning and mental health. It was important to parents and to students. They were passionate about it, that this is a key area that they want addressed through their learning in Fort Bend ISD. So we're going to continue that pattern this fall. In fact, the very first one is at Marshall High School on October 1st, and John Tanner will be there to help lead the protocol that night. And then we will pick up and lead the protocol for the rest of the feeder pattern meetings until we've had a feeder pattern meeting for every one of our 11 high schools, which includes all of the elementaries and middle schools. Okay? In addition to that, I want to come back to the strategic framework for a moment and want to thank the board again for the work that you have done to build out this honeycomb that represents our strategic plan. The top tiers, the core beliefs, mission, vision, profile, and district goals have all set the core of the work in community-based accountability. And then the drivers listed at the bottom are the district leadership work around curriculum development, leadership development, continuous improvement, and the scalable systems that we need in order to continue to grow community-based accountability to where it is effective to get the kinds of student outcomes we want from our organization. I will now transition into one segment of the community-based accountability system, which is our state accountability information. While we believe there are certain flaws in the state accountability system, we also believe there is some value in assessing where we are as a system, especially when it comes to examining differences in performance between our student groups and trying to ensure as a system that we're improving performance for all of our students. So I'll walk you through briefly what the state accountability system looks like. First of all, the system is new to Texas in that we are under an A to F rating system. It started first with districts getting ratings this way last year, and campuses for the first time received A to F ratings this year. Each campus and district is rated in 4 areas. They have an overall score, and then they have a domain 1 score, which is really mostly about passing rates. What percentage of your kids are passing the test? The second domain has 2 parts. 2A is all about what percentage of your kids are what percentage of your kids are making a full year worth of growth, and you may get a point for a full year worth of growth or a half point if they've made some growth but not sufficient to equal a full year worth of growth. So 2A represents the summary of how many of our kids are moving a full year worth. And then 2B is relative performance, so they compare each one of our campuses in our district to other like school districts or campuses throughout the state who have a similar economically disadvantaged percentage of students enrolled in the school. And so we're graded on that. And then finally, Domain 3 is about closing the gaps. And closing the gaps compares student groups by ethnicity and by program area. So ethnicity plus English learners, special education, economically disadvantaged. They all have individual targets as student groups in Domain 3, and we'll go into that a little bit more in here in just a moment. So how did Fort Bend ISD do in 2019 on the state accountability system? First of all, the district as an overall grade has an 89. We actually earned a scale score of 90, but we're capped at a grade of 89. That capping occurs when any campus earns a D or F in either a domain or the overall score. Then the district is automatically capped to a grade of 89 or a B. In Domain 1, we earned an 89. In Domain 2A, that's the student growth piece, we earned an 85. And in Domain 2B, compared to comparable districts, we earned a 90, or an A. And then in Domain 3, we earned the 89, or the B. I would now like to summarize briefly for you the campus overall performance, and I'll move counterclockwise in this graphic. So first of all, I'm excited to report, under this new A to F system, every single one of our campuses met standard this year. So we're excited about that. That represents a great deal of hard work on the part of our campuses. Amongst those campuses, we had 74 out of 77 of our campuses that are rated who earned an A, B, or C overall rating. Again, a very positive start to the new A to F rating. We had no campuses who earned an F overall. We do not have any PEG campuses designated this year. That's a provision by a state provision whereby a student can transfer if the school is not performing well, so nobody designated that way this year. We do have 3 campuses with an overall D who are making progress and who all were above the Met standard line, and we will continue to work to disrupt patterns to move in the direction we want to go. We have 2 comprehensive support campuses, and the only campuses that can be designated as comprehensive support are Title I school-wide campuses. And what it means is that there's significant progress needed, and that's Lantern Lane and Hunter's Glen. And I will tell you, both campuses made huge progress this year in the state accountability system. And so they are now designated comprehensive progress. At the end of this year, if they continue that progress, they will come out from under that designation. It's a 2-year designation. We then also have 30 campuses designated as targeted support. And what that means is it's a brand new definition under this new system, but it was retroactively applied 2 years. So while we got the definition in 2019, they applied it to 2017 and 2018 for 3 years worth of performance. And if a campus missed a target for a given student group 3 years in a row, then they're designated as targeted support. So we have 30 campuses in that situation. And then we have 5 additional targeted. What that means is a campus has missed their target either 1 time or 2 times. If it were to happen again, they would be designated as targeted support. If a campus repeats targeted support, a Title I campus, then they can actually become a comprehensive campus under the new definitions. Okay, that said, one of the important things we want you to know about Domain 3 for the Fort Bend ISD, and this is where all of the federal elements of the accountability system are housed, even though overall it's the state system. This is where we house the federal components or the performance targets for each student group. So what happens here is that they assess all of the various targets for growth, for passing rate. The federal level means you have to be at meets or above, not just barely passing, but well into passing, and graduation rate and college and career readiness. So out of 91 targets for Fort Bend ISD, we met 85 of the 91, or 93% of the performance targets. We missed 2 performance targets in math for improvement for our Hispanic population and our special education population, although we did see progress. And in addition to that, we missed the graduation rate indicators This is the federal definition of graduation rate, which is only on the 4-year graduation rate. It does not include IEP continuers into a 5th or 6th year of school. The state graduation rate contains that, but the federal does not. So we miss that in 2 or more races, Hispanic, English learners, and special education. Additionally, if a campus is at 90% or above, or a district is at 90% or above, you also have to continue to increase 0.10% in addition to having met the target in order to be considered having met your performance target. Okay. We consider this next category, distinction designation, sort of like a bonus category. We often get asked, what can you do to get more distinction designations? But the way this works in the state accountability system is that they take your performance in each of the categories of content areas and college and career indicators, post-secondary readiness, and they compare you to 39 other schools just like your school or your district, and they put you in rank order on each of the indicators. And then whoever falls in the top quarter of that comparison and ranking is given a distinction designation in that area. That said, we had 157 designations earned by our campuses. We had 48 campuses who earned 1 or more, and we had 4 who earned all possible distinctions for their campus. Okay. We're going to quickly show you some trend lines around reading ELA. And what I would like to say before getting into the performance that we see here is that we've chosen to show you one sampling of the data. All of the data for all subject areas is in your printed accountability report. But one of the things we want to point out about these trend lines is that they tend to ring true across all of the content areas. And in part, we believe that's because literacy affects everything. And so one of the patterns I want to show you first is the data from 2016 to 2017 through 2018-19, so 3 years worth of data on a trend line. And this is summarized across the district for grades 3 through 8 and high school EOCs. So when we look at what the passing rates, so approaches or above, when we look at those passing rates, what we see in these patterns is either we have steady performance in some of our top performing groups, or we have incremental growth in the right direction for some of our most critical populations like English learners, special education, and African American and Hispanic. In this particular graph, I'll note that African American and Hispanic had exactly the same percentages, so their lines overlap on this particular trend line. In addition to that, what we would also like to demonstrate is that when we move to meets or above, there are 3 levels: approaches, which is just right at the passing line, meets is the next level of performance, and masters is the highest level of performance. When we move to looking at 3-year trend lines for either meets or masters, what we see is that the lines separate further between our student groups. So that's an important pattern to note. One of the things we want to target in our new year improvement plans is focusing on meets or above performance, not just focusing at the approaches level. And more importantly than all of that, we want to focus on growth for every single student. So you'll notice that the lines separate a bit more under meets and also under masters. This represents the master's level of performance. Now I would like to take you into a different type of chart that may help you see the things that I think are important to the board around a gap analysis between our student groups. This particular set of bar charts, and I've got an example here and then I'll show you some more specific data, but one of the things about these stacked bar charts is that you should see the dark black line that represents the passing level for the test. Anything above that line means that percentage of students passed the test in one of the 3 levels of performance: approaches, meets, or masters. But the percentages below the line, the orange, represent the percentage of students that did not pass the test. And that's where we can best see the gaps in performance between our student groups. You'll notice at the very bottom of the bar charts are the years, 2017, 18, and 19, and then up the side is the performance percentage for each student group. So let's take, for example, reading English language arts. And this first chart shows the performance of our various ethnic groups compared to the district level performance. And so one of the things that stands out at me whenever I look at this particular set of bar charts is that we have a really low percentage of our Asian population that is not passing the test. That's about 7%. and that stayed pretty constant across the 3 years. But what I do notice when I look at this chart is that our African American and Hispanic populations have more significant numbers of students who are not passing the test. However, you'll notice that that bar chart in the orange is getting shorter. So it's moving in the right direction for our African American and Hispanic students. And then I would like to also show you, let me also say that the purple at the bottom of the graph also represents differences in performance between student groups at the approaches level. So those are the students who just passed the test. Then the blue represents the percentage of students who got to the next level of performance at meets. And then the green represents the percentage of students who actually got all the way to the master's level on their various tests. The next chart represents our economically disadvantaged special education and English language learners. And you will notice in the orange area for special education, that's one of our more significant areas to work on. One of the flaws in the state accountability system, though, is that the tests are not completely developmentally appropriate for all students. We've talked about that many times here through various discussions about the accountability system. And so one of the things we're working to do through community-based accountability is to find better ways, in a formative way, to assess where students are and what areas to target for improvement to disrupt these patterns and to improve performance for our special education students and our English language learners. I'll point out again that the English language learners are moving in the right direction. You see the orange chart shortening across 17, 18, 19. So less of a percentage that did not pass the test. There's one other significant piece of data that I would like to show you tonight before I transition over to my colleagues to talk about how the district is working to ensure student outcomes. And that is, we conducted a scatter plot of the overall performance scale score for all of our campuses against economically disadvantaged percentages to see what would happen when we stratified performance like that. And what we see is, for example, the blue dots represent campuses that have the lowest percentages of economically disadvantaged, so under 25%. The green dots represent the next band, 25 to 50. The orange represents 50 to 75, basically, and then the red dots represent campuses over 75% economically disadvantaged. The gray line, solid line through the middle, represents the mean of the district performance. This chart looks just like the state chart in every accountability system I've worked with over 30 years of being an educator. What we continually see with the state accountability system is it's more a signal of where our poor students live than it is a system of showing what campuses are growing our kids the most. So there's a problem still in the state accountability system that we point out using these charts. We went further and broke this information down by elementary and then middle school and high school. And what we see at the elementary level, we were a little surprised by, we do not see a statistical significance to the economically disadvantaged percentage against the elementary scores. But what we also must note is currently all of our campuses at the elementary level are performing above the Met standard line. And when you look at the red category at the far right, we want to look at those campuses that are at the top of the performance within their band and start asking some questions about what they're doing that's helping that performance, right? And by the same token, if we look at the far blue and we see dots kind of below the median line, we want to ask what's going on, because we really should be seeing higher performance there. But the ultimate goal here is to move all campuses to the top and disrupt these patterns that seem to be represented over and over again in the state accountability system so that we can do better things for our kids. This is the middle school chart. And then a similar pattern exists in the high school chart. And what I will say is at the middle school and high school level, we do see a statistical significance to the economically disadvantaged percentage on the campus versus the performance overall for the campus. And that, again, is a pattern we want to disrupt and ensure that we work to improve the state accountability system with our influence through the community-based accountability system, working with the 50 other districts in TPAC. With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Stephanie Williams and Carmela Levy-David to help talk about the leadership and instructional efforts being made in the district.
Thank you, Audra. I'd like to start by greeting our board president, Jason Verdeen, our board of trustees, and our superintendent, Charles Dupree. And thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute to this wonderful presentation. The graphic that you see displayed represents a collaborative effort to reach student outcomes from several different levels of leadership in our district. Our instructional leadership develops and assesses the effectiveness of our overall district strategy to improve student outcomes, while our school leadership recommends strategies and also holds campus leaders accountable for guiding and for also implementing and supporting the process and signaling additional needs. Our campus leadership piece drives the execution of district strategies throughout the learning community, along with communicating supports needed to school leadership. The second piece that I'd like to address is our leadership support, which is our work to categorize how the work is implemented. And we do that through assigning different tiers to our campuses. At the organizational level, tiers are based on our work with community-based accountability. However, although the tiers shared in this slide are based on accountability outcomes, they also share many commonalities with the multi-tiered system of support created by our instructional leadership team. Our Tier 1 campuses are schools that have earned the highest ratings in each domain with overall ratings of A or B, sustained academic growth trends. Our Tier 2 campuses have had some fluctuations in their growth, but have shown some consistent growth as well, but may be identified for some additional targeted support as mentioned earlier. And our Tier 3 campuses are campuses that require the most support and in many cases have not been able to achieve the sustained growth that we'd like to see consistently. They're also sometimes identified as either needing comprehensive support or have an overall rating of D in one or more domains, or have been designated for targeted support. The final piece is our leadership support. And I'd like to begin by thanking the board for approving the additional positions in response to campuses signaling a need for additional support through the approval of school improvement specialists to support the work. The school improvement specialists will have a deep knowledge of the nuances that make each campus unique and may contribute to eliminating gaps and or barriers to the success of implementation of our overall district strategy. They do this by addressing not only state accountability and compliance needs, but also our community-based accountability needs. Their work supports principles in building a bridge that moves away from state accountability and focuses on community-based accountability needs by supporting campuses not only with creating unique profiles of needs, analyzing trend data, conducting effective walkthroughs, collaborating on targeted improvement plans, on campus improvement plans, and also, where required by TIA on those actual targeted improvement plans that I mentioned earlier, and also supporting professional learning experiences. Part of their role will be daily campus visits that allow them to provide job-embedded feedback and signal emergent issues before they become critical. At this time, I will have Stephanie Williams continue the presentation and describe our work leading the improvement framework.
Thank you, Carmela. Good evening. Audra started the presentation tonight by overviewing our community-based accountability system, which defines what it is we're going to hold ourselves accountable to as an organization. Then we went through the STAR data, which demonstrates some trends academically in how students are performing on that one date and time according to the test. If we're going to achieve the hopes and dreams that our community has and that we as educators have for our students in Fort Bend, the pathway to doing that is through improving teaching and learning. Because of the diverse needs of our campuses, knowing that out of all of them, you can't pick two that have the exact same needs for their students or even for the educators, it was important to identify a common language about how we go about improving teaching and learning. This summer, we worked with campus leaders across all schools in Fort Bend to define the Leading Improvement Framework. This framework has been used in instructional leadership cadres before in Fort Bend in order to help leaders define their expectations, inspect, and follow through with feedback to improve practice. The framework is made up of 3 components. First, we ask campus leaders to clearly define what it is that they expect to see teachers and students doing within a learning experience. Then we ask them to define protocols for how they will inspect, either through observation or the review of artifacts, to determine if the expectations are really making it to students, through teachers to students. Finally, we ask leaders to engage in a conversation with feedback so that educators are challenged to reflect on their practice and think about how they can improve and support students in improving what they do academically. One of the things that we worked really hard with campus leaders and the Department of School Leadership this year on was revising our campus support team walkthrough structure. That's one of the places that you'll see the Leading Improvement Framework in practice. Just 2 weeks ago, we started our walks. We went to the campus. The principal led defining expectations with the walkthrough team, which was made up of central office leaders and campus leaders and teachers. He defined that he wanted to see students interacting with success criteria in order to acknowledge what they could do and what they needed help on. As we engaged in walks over the next hour, we looked for observational evidence of that occurring with students. When we returned together as a team, we engaged in a feedback protocol where we noticed observations of evidence where we saw that occurring. We looked for inspirations, things that inspired us around the work with success criteria. We engaged in some wonderings, and finally we ended with suggestions for improvement. At the close of the walk, the campus leader identified a needed help, a support that the campus could use in order to move practice forward. 3 days later, we were back on campus meeting with the administrative team, defining how they could create feedback protocols to work with their teachers so that they had immediate feedback on an observation from an administrator, and then also the support through professional learning. We'll go again this Thursday where we'll engage in not a CST walk, but an informal walk with that leadership team, and we'll engage teachers in feedback in order to continue to help them with understanding what the practices are that drive student ownership and with implementing those practices. Our hope is that as we get more clarity and practice with using this Leading Improvement Framework, we're able to help leaders clearly define expectations for success related to teaching and learning, that we have observational evidence of those practices going on, and that most importantly, our teachers who are on the front lines receive the feedback that they need to continue making improvements and leading our students towards success. And that concludes our presentation. At this time, our team is ready for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Mr. Rosenthal, do you have questions or comments?
Yes. So I'll start with Stephanie, the last thing that you just spoke about. Do teachers understand the nature of all these walkthroughs and people coming into their classrooms, and are they made to feel safe so they know they're not being necessarily critiqued for performance, but it's in this overarching goal of does everybody on the campus, especially the teachers, do they understand it?
On the campuses where I'm walking, I would say yes. We even have teachers who we've observed join us in the debrief protocol, and I know that one of the principals was nervous about having the teacher there, and I said, well, why don't you leave her? I think it'll be good. And he asked her, and she said, I'm here because I want to get better, and I want to hear what is said. The protocol with noticings, wonderings, inspirations, and suggestions, it's a change this year, leads to a very positive focus on what is going well there and some small tweaks in order to improve.
Okay. As long as the teachers understand and feel safe in that with all these people coming in and doing walkthroughs. Great. Dr. Udi, you kind of answered the question that the outliers that stood out on page 28. So, because that's what I just circled those things and said, okay, what is happening here that is is obviously producing good results.
So that is a question we want to ask. There's much more to the set of questions, though, because this is one test on a single day.
Right.
So it's one piece of information in the bigger picture. What also helps inform that practice is what's going on every day through formative assessments, and our students making the kind of growth that we can predict basically how this is going to turn out well before we get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And that's why I've, especially in the student ownership pilot, that's why I keep kind of asking about the correlation between that and the eventual STAR score. So, and then on, I guess on really, you can look at any of these charts or graphs, and I don't want to put you on the spot because you may not have the answer offhand, but when we're talking in percentages about how many kids equals 1%.
Well, if you
Obviously,
consider that we have about 77,000 kids in the district, times the 1%, that's about how many kids we're moving in a given direction every time we increase by 1% in this system. And that's a big target to move in a district of this size.
No, overall, I understand that. But
Now-
I'm just looking at some of these, where
One
you're-
important point I'll add about this data, we represent the district data so we know where we stand overall as a district. But one important factor in our discussions together is that really where we're going to get movement is to get to this level of detail and our formative assessment detail with each campus on each of the indicators. You can't move the district as a whole. You've got to look at where each campus is in moving students in the right direction, and that will inform our practices at the district level. If we see patterns across campuses, that means we might need to have more professional development or protocols and such to help support those efforts. If there are patterns at specific groups of campuses, then we look into why that's happening and address it specifically.
Okay, and so my last question is, if you go to page 8, you have all these key questions.
Yes.
So take any of them. Say the first one. What would you expect a positive response to look like?
To that system? So one of the things that campuses are doing with this, for example, the 6 pilot campuses, is they've taken each of these key questions, and their first discussion is centered around what is our relationship to this key question? Is this an area that we think we're doing great things in? And if so, that might be a lower priority because we're going to kind of hold that system in place. Whereas if we need to make a major transformation, we're going to signal that we're color coding that orange to say that's a major area we want to work on. Well, one of the patterns we're seeing from that is that all 6 of our pilot campuses have signaled orange on student ownership of learning. They all realize we need to work on Tier 1 instruction to ensure students own the learning. So the responses are different for every campus, but every one of the campuses has centered on things like students know how to self-assess, they know the success criteria for what they're learning that day and how they're going to demonstrate their learning, they understand the learning intention of the lesson that day, and there's meaningful conversation going on. So each campus is getting into specific strategies to address those things as a response to these questions. Does that make sense, or do I need to clarify?
I think so.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Tolsan.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I want to start by giving kudos to everyone on the team and to all the leaders at our campuses because no failing campuses is a big deal. And we need to recognize that, and this board does recognize that. And so kudos to the team for the hard work, to the principals, and of course the teachers in the classrooms where the rubber meets the road. It does not go unnoticed that was a whole lot of hard work. And it really is a testament to the systems that we've put in place as a board, and Dr. Dupree carrying those out, and then you guys going out and making that happen. So I just want to say that at the outset because it's a pretty big deal, and it's also being recognized at the state level. So I would just want to say I appreciate all the hard work. Because we are a district and a board of continuous improvement, I wanted to ask a couple questions, but also point out a couple of things that are areas of concern to me that I know 100% are areas of concern for you guys. I don't think we're going to differ in this at all, but as a trustee, I just really feel like I want to put a fine point on these things because we still have more work to do, obviously, until every kid is passing. So the first thing, I was looking at our charts on page 17 and even the charts that Mr. Rosenthal referred to on pages, like, I think 21 and 22. And looking at that data, and there are a few areas of concern, obviously. First of all, our African American and Hispanic populations, we still have about a quarter who are failing. That's 25%. That's too many. And if you add in the roughly 31% who are approaching, we're looking at 56% of the population that still needs help and still needs work. Our ECODIS is also population is also at about 59% that still needs interventions and still needs help. We see our systems working. I think we're moving in the right direction, but I'd really love to see us, have those interventions and really get those kids the help they need to ensure opportunities. And obviously, always our special ed population, we are definitely improving. We definitely have great systems in place, but those numbers are dismal. Now, being part of that community, I 100% recognize that STAR testing is stupid for the average student with especially an intellectual disability. So we don't have, we're giving them individualized plans, but we're not giving them individualized testing options, and a lot of that is reflected in these numbers. But the bottom line is the state holds us accountable. This is the system we're under, and so you guys know we've got to get better at it. So I just wanted to make those couple of points there.
Thank you.
A couple more questions. I agree with Mr. Rosenthal. I circled on pages 28 and even those pages that follow that, we can say that this chart shows us or really just identifies where our poor populations are. But what it shows me is that we have schools with higher economically disadvantaged populations that are doing really well. Mm-hmm. So that's what it tells me. And I don't want to focus on the former. I want to focus on the latter. And so I agree with Mr. Rosenthal. I think we should be looking at these schools, find out what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're successful, and see if we can model or replicate that in other schools, because I counted schools with 75% plus economically disadvantaged students. We had 7 out of 22 that are above 80, and the 50 to 74% economically disadvantaged students, we had 9 out of 14 that are above 80. 9 out of 14. So there are lessons to be learned there. And I hope that you guys, you indicated that you were, but I hope that you guys are digging into that to make sure that we know why.
Yes, ma'am. And I would also add that we continue to dig into that by looking at systems across the campus. You'll hear more next go around with school improvement around implementing the progressions of practice as systems to improve the quality of Tier 1 instruction. The way that we get at making improvement is not necessarily by looking at the results of a specific state test, but by looking at the performance underneath that and where can we improve literacy. Where can we improve numeracy specifically to the needs of individual students? So we tier levels of support, and we're working to get better at all of those levels of intervention. And I believe that's what's moving these numbers. It's not just necessarily tweaking how we do state testing, but using our REN 360 data, using our common formative assessments, using the day-to-day work and engagement of students to assess where can we tweak things to improve and get leverage.
And I totally agree with that, and our local accountability system is definitely going to be have a positive impact, I think, on student achievement, not just on the single state test, but across the board. But there's something underlying these numbers, and you know, you're talking some about the underlying, but there's something to be said for those systems are working at some campuses, and you know, Dr. Dupree has always said, if we do what's right for kids, it's going to be reflected. We don't have to worry about the state test because it's going to be reflected on it. I believe that as well. But as long as we're under this regime, so to speak, this testing regime we have in place, you know, we've got to be sure that our kids are getting everything, all the interventions they need, and they're ready for it. So I just want to make sure that we're digging in and seeing what, you know, what these campuses are doing. Because my kids were at Heritage Rose, and they performed very well this year, and I've watched them historically do things and really have some excellent interventions for students, and it's paying off in those results. So the last question I have, so we have those pilot campuses for local accountability. My daughter happens to be at one of them, and I have seen a lot of positive in her ownership of learning, in the way that they're conducting class, in the way that they're putting responsibility on students. It's kind of, she's at a middle school, it's kind of crazy to see 11, 12, 13-year-olds and kind of them taking responsibility and ownership for their learning. So my concern, though, is as they matriculate up,
How are we going to carry that?
what happens? Because I don't want her to lose that. I don't want any of those other kids to lose that as they enter into high school or from elementary to middle school. So what are we doing about that? How are we going to continue it?
So one of the things we've talked about is that it is a multi-year implementation of community-based accountability system, but we're not sitting stagnant with the other campuses while the 6 are piloting work and we're training up the 10. We're actually doing some things across all campuses to start informing them about community-based accountability and let them start thinking in that direction. For example, when we developed our campus improvement plans this year, we focused on the systems that need to be in place to improve outcomes for students, not just, hey, we're going to move from this percentage to that percentage on STAR, but more, what are the specific systems that we need to work on to get better? So it's starting to, at a lower key level, I guess, starting to move them in the direction of that thinking and gearing them up to be ready to go full tilt with it.
So I guess what I would like to know, so that's good and understandable, but what I want to know is for these specific students who have been impacted by the local accountability pilots, are we going to continue those strategies and those things with those students? Because I don't want it to get lost. You know, I recognize it has to go slow. I recognize we can't roll it out across the district. It can't go fast enough for us because we obviously, for obvious reasons, but we also understand. But what about these particular kids?
It might be a factor to consider too in the selection of the next 10, and I'll let Stephanie pick it up from there.
So all of our campuses are working on the student ownership development. It's really a tribute to the buy-in of these 6 campuses toward the board's goal on student ownership, that they prioritize that as one to work on. But at all of our campuses, teachers and leaders receive training on implementing those ownership practices that you're mentioning. And part of the CST walk across the district is to gauge the implementation, which will help with readiness as we transition to community-based accountability.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that we have consistency for those kids and that they don't get lost in the mix as they matriculate up to other schools. Because we all know that consistency is what's going to really make an impact. And if we did it here in 1 grade or in 2 grades and then we lose it after that, then I'm left asking, what have we done? So
I want to reiterate something that Ms. Williams said that's critical to the conversation. When we think about community-based accountability, The key questions drive the actions that signal us where support is needed. But the community-based accountability system is really the system that's holding us accountable for accomplishing the goals that the board has set forth. So with our pilot campuses, we're testing the water so that we can look at what evidence is going to show us that, so that we can work through that system piece. But as Stephanie said, all of our campuses are working towards student ownership of learning. The curriculum is built in a way for them to use the tools to engage in the instruction that you're seeing in your in the classrooms in Thornton. And so as we work through sharing more of our strategic plan and the milestones that are going to get us there, I think that will make more sense as we work through that process and we begin to start